I'm Kristen Arnett. I'm a queer Floridian novelist and librarian, and this is The Written Scene.
Hello and welcome to The Written Scene. My name is Adam Greenfield. I am the host, and I am very excited about today's guest. But before we get into that, if you are new here, welcome. What we do is we talk to authors and artists and creatives about path and process, usually about writing, sometimes a little more than that. If you have been listening, thank you. Welcome back. And I'm please tell your friends as much as you can. So the more people listening, the better. All right, let's dive in. Today is someone that she was teaching a class for MFA for All, and after the two sessions, I was eager to hopefully have her on the show. She agreed, thankfully. So, Kristen, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk today.
Yeah, it should be fun. I got a lot out of that class, and it definitely helped me, and I just feel better as a writer. So hopefully hopefully other people listening will feel a little better about their craft as well. So
Yeah, I hope so too. That'd be wonderful.
yeah. So, okay, let's start with the recent stuff. Now, you recently put out a book, Stop Me If You've Heard This One.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the book, like what it's about and what inspired that one?
Yes. So I'm a third generation Central Floridian. So I always say two different things about my writing. One is that I'm a queer author. So I like to make the joke that every bar I go into is a gay bar because I'm gay and I go in there.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think the same can be said about my work. Since I'm writing it and I'm queer, the work is inherently queer. And also, I very much write Florida work. I'm very much a place writer, and I write very specifically about Central Florida. So, this latest novel of mine, my third novel, is about a lesbian birthday party clown in Central Florida. And I wanted to write a book. It was inspired by the idea of writing about the philosophy of humor or the idea of the joke, very specifically from the viewpoint of a clown. I wanted to write a book that was funny, that had a clown in it, which is a difficult task, I know, because people have very real fears of clowns. I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and I'm like, I understand what has been wrought upon like the social landscape. But I wanted to write a book very specifically that was funny, that featured a clown, that was about the philosophy of humor, but that was also about the idea of living in a tourist hospitality hub economy and what it means to be a living working artist and have people come and consume art and leave being like the art you make is tacky. And what does
Mhm.
that mean when you're really like, a working artist, which means you have to work these kind of jobs, including hospitality jobs, in order to have the funds to make the art that you really want to be making? And how does capitalism kind of thwart that, or how does it support it? And at the same time, how is it funny? So I do think it's very much like a glass half full, beloved clown car of a novel is maybe how I describe that
That's a
book.
good way to put it. Have you ever been a clown? Like, have you ever? I mean, I was going to ask if you've ever done taxidermy too, but I'm
Oh
curious.
yeah,
Yeah.
I have not, but I think I'm a child of the '80s. I grew up with like more clown, maybe more like visible clowns around, right? Like in the '80s, there was like clowns at birthday parties, like clowns at like festivals, clowns in these kind of capacities where you saw them more often. Whereas like now, I think there are more clowns again in a kind of different context, like the Gen Z is like incredibly into clowns right now, but I never did clowning myself, but I was around a lot of them growing up. I never was scared of them or anything like that because I think that's a question people immediately ask because there's plenty of people who are afraid, like I mentioned previously. But I have never done any clowning myself, and that's always my favorite thing to write about, a profession or some kind of idea or concept that I really know very little about, but something that people have a lot of strong opinions about. And people have a lot of strong opinions about clowns. And I was like, what do I know about clowns? And then my librarian's brain kind of took over and I did like deep dive research. And I was like, oh, this is way more expansive and broad than I had considered. And that always means, for me, anyways, at least it turns into a book. So,
Yeah, no, those are usually the best books too.
yeah.
You I see things and sometimes hear things and think, man, what a great story that would be. And I now have like 20 different story ideas, short story ideas that I'm hoping to get to at some point. Do you encounter this? And do you ever say to yourself, I just don't have time for that story?
Yeah, I think as creatives, that has to happen to us all the time, right? Where if we're curious individuals moving through the world, and that's what I think creative people are, curious individuals who are interested in the world around us, that means that we're going to encounter interesting situations, people, concepts like on the regular, and think that we would possibly have all the time to like craft those into like coherent, cohesive stories is just not likely. So I do think I quite often am like moving through spaces where I'm like, that is fascinating to me. I would love to write about it. The ones that end up turning into a story for me are the ones that like refuse to leave my brain. So, sometimes we encounter something where like, that's really funny. And maybe it turns into a story we tell at the next party we're at,
Right, right.
or we send as a voice memo to a friend or something like that. We use it as like story, but not as the story. The ones that end up turning into like actual written work for me are ones where I don't share it, but I can't stop thinking about it. So if I'm thinking about it for longer than say like a few days in a row, then that's like one where I'm like, I'm supposed to sit down and write this thing, I think.
Yeah. Do you write down all the ideas and then come back to them, or do you just say if it's stuck with me, I'm going to write it, and if it doesn't, I'm moving on.
I think if it doesn't stick with me, I'm just willing to let that like float in there and just be a part of like the lore that makes up like Kristen Arnett's brain,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah,
Where I'm
yeah.
like this, it's like even if I don't write it, it's something that is like part and parcel now of like my creative structure of the mind and how I move through the world. So even if it doesn't end up on a page, it'll end up kind of somewhere because I've encountered it. So I usually am like, okay, if that's worthwhile, it'll come back to me. I feel that way about deleting work too. Like I'm not precious about keeping things. I'm like, if this is something that's meant to me on the page, it will resonate with me and come back again.
What I wouldn't give to have a writer brain like that, because I hold on to things, and I've got all my drafts and all these ideas and all these written down things on napkins or whatever it may be, and I don't know why I still
Yeah.
have them. Because why I've moved on to the electronic part of things, but I wish I had the ability to just say, I'm gonna let,
Mhm.
like a meditational thing, like it's a leaf on a river, and it just kind of just let it go, those kinds of things. So. Did you kind of get this from experience? Were you ever at a time one that did hold on to things?
I I don't know. I don't know if I ever have been as a writer. And I think that's very fascinating because I have my master's in library and information science. And before I had that, my full time career since I was like 20 years old was working full time in libraries. And then those are like right repositories of like archival work and information. And so maybe it did the opposite to my brain, which is that like it's there. Like if I need to access it, it's like accessible in some kind of way. So I think a lot of the time, something that feels urgent to me or has like like it feels propulsive means I need to sit down and work on it then, and that's how I know that's a thing. But I've never felt like I need to. Well, this is different when it comes to novel work, right? If it's like a particular project and there's like an idea, I do like end up keeping these Word documents for a particular, for each novel. I have like one Word document that just has what I call spill inside of it. That is just like, here's something funny I thought of in the middle of the night. Or like if I was out at a bar with friends and thought of something, I emailed it to myself. Like I'll collect those things inside of the document. Quite often, like I don't need to do that.
Mm.
If it's important, my brain remembers it. But there's something about like just kind of collating everything and collecting it in there. But like for a short story or an essay, like those things, I don't think I've ever kept things for them. It just feels like if it's the time to write it, it's the time to write it. And if it's not, then it wasn't meant for me to write about or anything.
Yeah, yeah. How often do ideas come back to you then at a later point? And I'm because I'm kind of curious. I'll sometimes write something and think, oh, that's terrible, but there's a character in there I like at least, and I
Yeah.
want to try to remember that, so I just keep it. And maybe one day I can use it for a different story or different idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes they. the things that are interesting enough find their way back to me later on, and they might be just in a different form. It might have evolved into something else. It might not be that same kind of character, but there might be like characteristics, or I'm always interested in characters who have jobs. I like writing people who work. So sometimes too, I'm like, what is it about this, like the kind of idea of like the domestics that are inside of like office spaces or like jobs, and so characterization sitting inside of those things, sometimes I'll be like, well, this doesn't live here, but later on for a different project or a story, that kind of characteristic will come back, and it might just like take the form of a different character, a different kind of thing. But if something's like interesting enough, it'll like migrate back in. It just probably has evolved into a different shape,
A different
maybe.
thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I want to bring up the one thing, or the thing you were talking about writing about jobs, and also that you mentioned you were working in libraries from the time you
Yeah.
were 20 on. I've had numerous different jobs, whether it was serving a court summons or working in a car parts recycling company or delivering pizza, whatever it may be. I've had so many different jobs, and because of that, I've been able to get a lot of story fodder.
Mhm.
I just have all these characters that I could write about from the people I've met. Do you think that's necessary for a good story, having all that background experience, or do you think you can just get it by just paying attention?
I think it's possible because people have done it, right?
You're
I
doing
I
it.
am very
Yeah.
much of the opinion that my own writing has been improved by being around people and being an observer of people inside of libraries. Very specifically for myself and my own work, it has been working in libraries is an interesting thing. I've worked in many different kinds of libraries too. I've worked for like about a decade in a public library doing children's services and circulation and interlibrary loan. And then I worked about like 5 years in an academic library where I ran their interlibrary loan department. And then I like spent about 5 years in a law library running and managing their circulation department. So it was like different kinds of things, but it's all being inside of libraries, like the Venn diagram where the center is like you're still in a library.
Right. Right.
And so much of library work is people coming in, and because it's like considered, even in an academic or a law, this kind of public service or public goods. So people who work there are kind of seen part and parcel as part of the furniture or part of the library. They don't really see you as a person a lot of the time. So people will act a kind of way there where they don't feel like they're acting like they don't have an audience, like you're not present as an audience of their behavior. So I would see these like slices of daily like humanity where I'm like watching a phone call with a bill collector, or like a couple's argument, or like parent child interactions, in a way where I'm like, you aren't considering the fact that another person's here as a third party observer, which is wonderful if we're thinking about writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
In
Mm-hmm.
terms of like how dialogue functions, right? Like dynamics between characters, like very specifically in terms of setting. This was made like very apparent to me in like my early days working in the public library, because I went to the grocery store across the street from the public library where I was working. It was after work, and I was going to get like, it was like Publix. I was getting like BOGO wine and frozen pizza or something. And a woman who came into the library all the time with her kids. I've seen this woman, I kid you not, like twice a week at least for like at least a couple years.
Wow.
And she came up to me and she was like, "Oh, hello. Can you please tell me where I can find, like," I can't remember what she said, but it was some kind of cereal or something. And I was like looking at her, I'm like, she thinks I work here. She doesn't
Right. Right.
recognize me as a person who interacts with her at the library. And I was like, this is like, it was like this little light bulb went off in my head for in terms of like character creation or thinking about things. I was like, I'm in a very specific job right now that allows me to see people act their most human, and to like be an observer of that. And I was like, I need to really be constantly thankful for that, and thinking about the fact that this allows me to kind of see into character in a way that will, if I'm thoughtful about it and if I pay attention, will really enrich my own work. And so I really do think I have like being full-time in libraries like for years and years and years to thank for that, for
Yeah.
character development.
It probably helped your observation skills as well, I would think.
I
You know.
hope.
Yeah, you hope. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it seems to be doing okay so far. Um, let's go even further back then, because I'm curious. As a kid, what were some of the books and stories you were reading? What were you into? Were you Were you, always at the library yourself as a kid?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I grew up in a very strict evangelical Southern Baptist household, which was difficult for me as like a closeted like queer kid.
Hmm.
So because I was one of the only people that from my church that wasn't homeschooled, and I'm thankful all the time for that, because it allowed me a kind of social interaction that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Whereas a lot of people I went to church with are very like limited in social circle because it was just all church all the time. And I got to see other people outside of it. But it meant that like my parents were incredibly strict when it came to what I could read and have access to. So we actually didn't go to the library very often. And when we did, I was like, it felt like, and I'm from Orlando, but that to me felt like Disney. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, we get to go do this. I'm so excited. I was thrilled. But the books that I was like, kind of cut my teeth on were like the Little House and the Little House books, like the whole series, Anne of Green Gables, like all those as like series books. They finally let me read like the Babysitters Club like books, and I was incredibly interested in those. And like now as like an adult I can look back and I was like I was very interested in them as like a young lesbian,
Of
very
course.
interested in like
Right.
these young women's relationships with each other. And I think I started being able to do this thing too, where when I was in public school, I had all these English teachers who would have books in class, and I just desperately wanted to read them, but I couldn't have them at home. So God forgive me, and I've made amends. In my years of library work, I would steal them from class
Oh
and
no.
take them, and I still have some of these copies. And so I'm like, I'm so sorry, Miss Anderson.
Yeah.
I apologize. The thing is, I think some of these teachers knew that I was maybe doing this, and they just let me have these copies. But I was so interested in horror. That's when I started reading Stephen King. I was very interested I read like Silence of the Lambs and like Red Dragon and a lot of these kinds of books. I also read like True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle, which was like this book about like a young woman who's like from almost like aristocratic English family that's like going in a ship that's over to like America, and midway through there's like a mutiny and like she's allowed to live, but then she has to work on the boat. So it's this kind of like what does it mean when you like have to like perform functions outside of like femininity? And I was like, this is so fascinating. I also read like Bastard out of Carolina at that point, which was like the real like nexus for me about becoming a writer, a place writer and a queer writer. And so I was reading these books that I was like allowed to read, right? These kind of like approved books, but then I was also secretly reading all these other kinds of books and I was gorging myself on them when I could, like hiding them under my dresser and then like pulling them out like secretly and trying to read them. But I loved reading. I think I ended up reading a lot of series that my parents would let me read just because I was so hungry to read anything that I was like, if it was a series, it means there's more and I can read like lot of something. And any book I had that I owned, because I didn't have that many, I read to tatters. Like I
Mm.
read and read and read until, and I've always been a rereader. And I don't know if how much growing up that way like made me into a rereader. So now a huge like point of like what book remains in my home is me being like, is this something I'm going to visit again? Regardless. But yeah, it was like a lot of like, here's what I can read visibly, and here's what I'm sneakily reading in the background.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did it open up even further when you went to school, to college? Did you expand a bit
Yeah.
more?
I had a very non-traditional kind of school path, so I think there's that. Because I got pregnant with my son when I was 18, so I had him and then came out and was working full time. So I was working full time and raising my son, and then was going to classes at night
Mm.
once he reached a kind of age. So I think that I was learning about a lot of things about myself and about the world and about like what that would look like because my 20s were I think very different than maybe other people who went like directly to like went through college that way. I finished my yeah, I'm like I guess I had like a very non-traditional all around like my publishing career is the same too. Like my first novel didn't get published until I was 38. So,
Wow.
I do think like I was discovering a lot of books at the same time too because I was like I have a lot of freedom, but then I was like I have no time to do anything because I was like working full time and then like trying to do school and yeah, trying to write, but then also like I was like devouring books like while I was and working in the library allowed me to be able to do that because I could take those books home for free.
Mm.
So I would work all these hours and then like at night I would like stay up with these like stacks of books that I brought home from work and just like gorge myself on them. So I think I really got into like a lot of very specific short fiction that way. I was reading like so much Flannery O'Connor. Like I was like, oh, the grotesque and the South. And I know that like so much of my early short fiction really modeled on this like framework of like me trying to like rewrite like a Flannery story because I grew up like so religious, although like Flannery was Catholic, but still felt like that. Like I loved like Mystery and Manners, which is like what I call the Flannery Bible, which is all her like collected like writings on writing. And then I loved her Habit of Being, which is like her collected letters and correspondence that she had with people. But I was really feeding myself like a lot of things. I feel like I discovered a lot of stuff. It was like a great time for me as like, right, because we model our writing off of the people that we admire and
Right.
that we read.
Yeah.
So in my 20s, it was like a strange time where I was like incredibly sleep deprived, but also like really like just soaked with like all this kind of like stuff I was learning at the same time.
I think I have a slightly similar path. I finally got my degree in my late 20s as an undergrad, but I
Mhm.
finally got that in my late 20s, just before I turned 30. I had my first book of poetry published at 40, before I hit 40, and
Yeah.
now I'm like, all right, I got to get more going. It's been 10 years since I've had a book, but I kind of understand that I'm just going to absorb what I can when I
Mhm.
can, while I'm doing these other things to just keep a roof over my head.
Yeah.
So I can definitely appreciate that. Now, you mentioned the masters in library and informational science or information science, and I'm assuming, unless you have a photographic memory, you've probably forgotten a lot that you absorbed in that time.
Yeah.
But in mentioning in talking about it a little bit ago, you talked about some of the things of how that job helped you as a writer. But what other ways has that informed you as a writer and shaped your own voice as a writer?
Yes. So a huge part of that, like in the practical aspect, is really through the years I spent working reference or doing research. So interlibrary loan helped with that because I think interlibrary loan is one of our like most amazing services that libraries have to offer because it means that you can essentially get any book or like article or thing from anywhere. It doesn't have to be like just centralized to your library. So it's kind of like a beautiful wish fulfillment of like,
Mm,
I want information. It's this weird thing and like, let's find it. So my brain has always been like very excited about that kind of prospect. But just years sitting reference means that you have to learn how to answer people's questions. And so much of writing is answering questions, right? So sitting the desk means people come up and ask you for help with an assortment of kinds of things. And your job as a librarian, specifically reference librarian, is to figure out what it is they actually need. And I've always called this the question under the question. So they'll come up and be like, oh, I need to know something about this. Like, say somebody comes up and they're asking about like grants or help with like applying for colleges and they're like of a certain age and like the more you talk to them the more that they reveal about things where maybe they're looking for that but they're also looking for like help and support by like maybe they're like the first person to go to college in their family and then also like help and support because like there's other things going on that they're trying to escape from so you're like trying to figure out the most assistance you can provide to that patron and figuring out what the actual question is. And I think that's so much of writing work to me. And so that really taught me when it comes to my own work, you come in with a premise, right? Or a general, like kind of maybe like less focused question, maybe a more direct kind of broad thing, right? You're like, I'm trying to answer this thing. And as you're working on that project, and I don't know, I honestly don't care if it's like an essay, a short story, or a novel, in the process of writing that thing, you uncover the real heart of the questions you're trying to ask, like the real thing where the story is sitting. And so doing a lot of that library work, like just like answering questions, really helped me to focus in on that in a way where I think it might have taken me longer if I hadn't spent those times like sitting and working at a reference desk. Also it taught me like the value of research
mm,
towards specific projects. So I do have books where it's like research is required. I'm working on novel 4 right now, and it's been like not since my first novel have I had to do this like this much intensive like research, like historical research and different kinds of things. And so being in a library and doing references taught me like there's many different ways to like dig into research, right? So there's like your cursory kind of Google searches, right? There's your Wikipedia rabbit holes, and there's YouTube if you need to watch videos about things. But then there's also like the idea of like web forums where you can learn about how people speak about a particular practice who are actually in like the practical aspect of it. Or there can be like ways in which you can go into archival work and find out work that people have already done about this thing that you're trying to figure out. So you're not doubling up on things that people have already done, right? Like somebody's already probably already done that for you, and you can like do that kind of thing and cut some of your research work in half. It's also taught me when to stop doing research because you have to sit down and work.
You have to actually write the thing.
Yeah, it can be like really, I think we can be our own worst enemy because if we're nervous about writing something, we can decide to spend too much time doing research and it can become kind of like a travel guide instead of an actual
The thing, the story.
yeah, fiction or something, where it's like, oh, I don't need to know like how many paces it takes to get from like the red light here to like, the record store across the street. Like, don't do that to me. I just want to like be living in the actual felt world. Like, so how much research do you need to like put that in place and how much is like too much?
We talked about that in that class, about over researching for a book and,
Mhm.
and what that can do. And that actually really stuck out to me because I've over researched myself out of a novel, of writing the
Yeah.
novel. I wanted to, I started researching space shuttles. And the next thing I know, I'm reading a manual of how to fly and fix a space shuttle, and I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm not, this isn't going into the book itself. What are some of the signs that you're doing too much research for a book or story? And once you've realized that, is it wise to walk away? Do you start over, or do you just keep going without doing as much research?
I think there's ways where you can correct course. I think for sure. One of those things is to just stop yourself cold turkey and start yourself writing the fictional thing because I think we can start off by being I need to be an expert of this before I begin
Mm,
because we're afraid of getting anything wrong. We have that right? That like reader, that angry critic who sits like in our brain. We're envisioning like the worst response to the thing, like the most bad faith response to the thing we're making. And we envision that person in the background being like, here's the hole I found, the place where you don't know where you're talking about. And so we worry ourselves into a position that like that isn't a real person, that's us.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's important to remember that that critic is you. So I usually what I try and do is if it's something I'm interested in, I let myself do research in a way that feels playful and innovating. So if the research is making me feel excited to write the fiction, then the research is doing its job and I'm doing the appropriate amount. If the research begins making me feel like I'll never know enough about this topic, I start to feel too stupid or not capable, or like then I'm doing too much research and I have to stop. And so I think an important thing to do at that point is to get right into writing the actual fiction because it's always okay to stop midway and be like, I don't really know what that is. Let me look up that specific thing. And so, for example, my first novel, Mostly Dead Things, which is about taxidermy, which I have never done before, I was very nervous that people who had done taxidermy would read this book and be like, she's a fraud. She doesn't know what she's talking about. So I did a bunch of research up front. And then when I got to that point of like mania, where I was starting to feel that I would never know because it was so much information, I made myself stop completely and start writing. And so when I would get to places, first of all, it absorbed way more than I thought it had. Your brain has retained way more than you think. So in all that research where you feel like you don't know enough, you've actually retained a lot of it.
Mm,
And so you trust your brain to do it. And the second thing is when I would come to things where I don't know that specific aspect, I don't really know like what kind of knife work you'd use for this. Is there a gutting practice like for like, a bird in this kind of way versus like a mammal? Like let me Google that, or let me go into these like resources that I've accumulated and I could find the answer to that and then I could move on. So there's ways in which to like correct course, which is what I will call that. Because going into a project after you reach that point where you feel like oh no is a great time to start it because you're moving your brain in a different direction and then you get an opportunity to release some of the information that it is retained without your sometimes without even your knowledge. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of Andy Weir, and The Martian, and just like how much scientific knowledge and space knowledge he had to have had. I don't think he researched all of that, but when you read it or even watch the movie, I guess, he doesn't really go deep into the science of things. He'll bring up a few things here and there, but he doesn't really go deep into it, and you kind of don't need it.
Yeah, I do think like quite often it's like it's the threading of these individual things, right? Quite often like less is more when it comes to like a lot. You don't want a glut of information inside of like a fictional account to like overwhelm a reader, because we're always talking about in scene anyway how to keep audience, your reader engaged with what the world you're trying to create. And so putting in too much glut of like a certain kind of information is a stop break for the eye every time you encounter it anyway.
Mm.
And we can feel it as we're putting it in, right? And so, like, knowing what things need to stay. And that's another thing I feel about to bring it full circle to ideas of deletion or taking things out. I am a huge fan of like, let's put a lot in all at once because we can take out a lot of things and see the thing that actually works on the page, you know?
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll put in like way too much about something, or I feel like I'm answering the question this like three or four times. And one of those is the right way to talk about it for the scene anyway. And I can feel it as I'm working, like, oh, this is the right one. And then I can go back through and like kind of excise those other things. And I think it's very much with factual information, right? Like we have like geography for place, or we have like some kind of career choice, or we have some kind of like hobby or thing a person does, or like just something we've learned a lot about. And if it's you know, a character, like how much do they think about it all the time, even, how much of it is like habitual, like a job that they do? I mean, these things kind of like fall into place as you're developing. But I think it's a developed, like putting in like research as a developed practice, like any other part of writing.
Yeah, yeah. Was there any part of the research for the taxidermy book, the Mostly Dead Things? Was there any part of it where you're like, okay, this is a little too gory for me. Like I can't, I don't know if I can write this.
Oh no.
No, okay.
I'm not a person like, I mean, I've always been like a long time horror person. I mean, I'm not like I don't like to sit and watch like Saw or
Sure,
Hostel or
sure.
any of these kind of like super like gore for gore's sake movie. But like, especially in terms of like something like taxidermy, no, that's like never bothered me. I did think to myself, like, how much is too much for the average reader, right? So I'm like, I wasn't trying to, because I'm writing the book for me. I'm my first reader. So
Hmm.
I want to
Hmm.
read something that I'm interested in. But I was like, how much of this is necessary and how much is it just too much for like just flamboyance sake, like I'm like, oh, it's flashy to have like spill or this kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, I'm not writing a horror novel, I'm trying to write literary fiction. So like, less is a little more. And even then I think that book was still too grisly for some people for sure,
I,
but I never grossed myself out.
okay.
I think there were times like there's once I was working the reference desk and watching like a YouTube video of like pig gutting, and I was like, please don't let anybody come
You
up
ever
behind me
walk
because
up?
they're
Yeah.
gonna think I'm a murderer for sure. But
Yeah, I started. So I was in Europe about a month or so ago, and I started reading the book on the Eurostar from London to Paris, and
mhm.
the French countryside's flying by, and it's just beautiful. And I open up the first page, and it just starts
Like deer
right in.
tumor in that
Yeah, right. And I'm just
yeah.
like, oh, this is quite a contrast here.
Yeah.
Um, but I wasn't expecting that because I don't know a lot about taxidermy. But as I got
Yeah.
into the book, I was like, oh, this isn't as gross or upsetting as it could be, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
So
some of that too is like I love the idea of like tonal shift. So I'm constantly excited as a writer and as like creative about like how we are able to shift tone and scene. To to go from something being funny to something being sad to something being like romantic to something being sexy to something being like very yearning or honest or like aching. Like how do we twist the wheel? And so a lot of that for me was doing like tonal shift in scene, because I'm like, this can read as very like traumatic and gory to people, and I really want this to be about like the nostalgia and ache for wanting like a past that's gone, like the memorialization of memory in this kind of way. So sometimes I hope that I was able to make those kind of scenes that could have read as like horrific or traumatizing as this kind of like interest in keeping like memory alive, or
Yeah.
like, right, like sometimes even maybe romantic. I was like, how do I make this like tonally feel these like two things at once and be kind of confusing?
It felt like there was a good connection with the vivid and the past. Like
Yeah.
it was a good mix because as soon as it felt like it was going a little vivid, it brought it back to, the character's past or whatever it might have been, and it was like, okay,
Mhm.
I see now why that was there. So
Yeah.
I mission accomplished, I should say.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah. Let's talk a little bit about this tweet that you did in 2018, that you kind of went viral. And look, I read that it ended up in the Internet Hall of Fame, which I did not know existed before I was looking into it. But it seems like social media is a real fickle beast anymore. What can you gain as a writer from how these platforms work?
Oh, I mean, I think for myself, at least at that point in time, I gained quite a few things from like social media. Some of it was, I did have this like non-traditional background. I don't have my MFA. I was like writing, I kind of tried to DIY my own like writing, like craft process, learning process by applying to like a lot of workshops. And I'd use any of my like vacation time that I had from library for like if I got into a workshop. So like I got into Lambda, and then I did Tin House summer workshop, and then Kenyon. And I really like I was like, I'm treating this as like learning spaces. So some of it was that. And then quite other parts of it at the time in the social media landscape. I yeah, I was in Orlando. Like people are doing readings, but I was like, oh, like you hear all the time, or at least you used to. It's like the literary scene is like, New York or maybe LA, but it's in these big cities
It's
that are
usually in New
kind of
York.
like
Yeah.
robust, like centers for art and creativity. And I was like, nobody wants to come down here, and I don't have money. I can't go. I was like, what does it mean to have access to like? I was like, I can read, but I want to like have access to conversations about art and writing, and like how do I make that happen outside of these like workshops that I would apply to. So some of it was like I ended up making like a lot of really good writer friends through social media, like the writer Jamie Attenberg, who is like a prolific writer who also runs like 1,000 Words of Summer. That she does every year. She and I met in like a Facebook group for writers who love chips.
The
Um,
show or the potato chips?
like yeah, like
Potato
potato
chips.
chips. Like
Okay.
it was
All right.
people who would post. It was editors, like publishing people, writers, like all posting me like I had these chips. This is my thoughts about them. It was just like a fun whatever kind of group, and you could tell like people's nature, like if they were more playful, if they were more like serious, and like I ended up like making really good friends with her through this
Oh, that's cool.
shit thing. But I was like, so much of it like social media at that point in time for me was I was like, oh, like we're writers, but we're also both people, and I like the way you think about the world. So I made a lot of friends that way. I don't know about the social media landscape now, because I think social media is functioning with very different intent behind it
Mm.
now, right? It's modeled off of like, and I say this as a librarian, a lot of misinformation. And that is not a helpful place in terms of being a creative or an artist with an eye towards like community making. It's like more community breaking. So I'm not sure how that like moves forward in that kind of way. I do know I'm so grateful for making like the kind of writerly and artist friendships that I made in these like kind of years, like that stupid tweet about the lizard that you brought up like in 2018. Yeah, it's like the biggest part of my Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
So it's like there's like sections about like, oh, she wrote this New York Times best-selling book, but listen to this
Well, let
lizard
me tell you
tweet.
about this lizard story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what people want to hear. So,
Yeah. Well, I find how artists and authors use social media to be both confusing and fascinating. Like
oh, sure, yeah.
you need
I
it.
mean, yeah, so much of it I was like using though is I was like, I'm just very, I think, incredibly silly and just a goofy person. And I loved using social media, especially Twitter, because that was really my medium, as a platform to be incredibly dumb.
Mm,
And I mean that as a compliment to
right.
myself. Like I
Right.
was making a lot of puns, a lot of like dad jokes, a lot of like, I was trying out bits. Like I'd be like, is this funny? I don't know. I'm going to do it for like a little while. And it was also like community engaging. So I would do these like, I use this as an example all the time, but I had this like bit going on where I was like, technically, whatever it is a ravioli. And I did that for like probably a couple, maybe 2 years. Like at least once a week, I did a ravioli joke, at least.
Wow.
And people would engage with it in different kinds of ways. They would either be like, tell me why it didn't work as a ravioli, or they'd be like, haha, I think that's funny, or they'd be like, this is a better way to tell the joke, or they would like, I don't know, but it was like, or people would get really mad. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know, it was like a very like interesting, like fascinating social experiment. But for me, I was like, I get a lot from like throwing something at the wall and seeing what sticks. So like, because I was like, that's so much of writing, just trying something out and see if it works. So social media, specifically Twitter, was like a way for me to be like, this is me seeing if it works, right?
It's like your first draft
Yeah.
platform. I did was not on Twitter as much as others. I was on it, but I wasn't posting on it. But as it has changed, I realized it was a good place to come up with even just like an elevator pitch.
Oh,
Like
for sure.
you just had
Yeah.
that short amount of space, to come up with this full idea. And I liked that about it. But you're right; it has completely changed since then, and it felt like during the pandemic things sort of came back to a community like place with it,
Mhm.
but then it just exploded again.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for social media to retain like permanent like levels anyway. I think we can think of any particular social media platform and see like the beginning and end dates of those things, or at least for like usability or like for practical purposes, right? There was like I still remember LiveJournal, right? There's like people
Oh
using
yeah,
like or like Zanga, people using like Friendster, or people like getting into MySpace.
I
Like
remember
these
MySpace.
right, like there's like shelf lives for these kinds of like types of social media. I think it's just because some of these ones were so large and helped people. I do know that like I owe like a lot of my writing career like wasn't like I didn't write better because I had Twitter, but I had access to people in different kinds of ways
Mm,
because I had this Twitter account that was popular, you know? And I know that that is like a fact that helped me. Like it was like, oh, people could see who I kind of was as a person, and even regardless of if they'd read my work or not, they're like, oh, she has like visibility in this kind of way that assisted me. And I'm not totally sure like how somebody does something like that now, because I know there's ways in which like people use TikTok or like Instagram and things like that. But it's a different animal than like the kind of text-based form
form,
of
yeah.
previous social media.
I see a lot of writer friends just constantly posting, and not to inundate you or drown you with their stuff, but it's just that it seems to be the way these algorithms work is that you just have to constantly be making a post about a book or an event or whatever it
Yeah.
may be, and that seems tiring, if not a full-time job itself.
Yeah, it also takes away from like the kind of prospect of like sitting alone with the page. There is something that's like it makes it more and more difficult to be like right like attention span or like right like that little drop of serotonin you get every time you hit
Mm-hmm.
like a click on something that kind of way, or posting something like whether people like joke around like posters disease, or
Yeah.
it's just like too much. But I don't know, there's just I think it's like trying to find new ways for myself, because I can only speak for me, like for myself to engage with those kind of things, because also not to bring it into like a different kind of space in terms of talking about writing, but yeah, like we used to be like using like social media as a platform to learn about news,
Mm-hmm.
and now it is like learning about news, but it's also learning about horror in real time, and that can be very upsetting to the creative brain. And like, what do we do, and how do we find ways to like circumvent still knowing about what's going on in the world while also making space and carving out time to like make art.
Right, right.
Yeah,
I keep seeing these memes where it's, the world's on fire, but then they're like, please read my book,
yeah, I
like
know.
it's just it's
Stuff.
so hard to just like say that's not important. My book though is what you should be reading,
Right.
so it's a weird spot to be in, I think, as any kind of
Yeah.
artist or creative, but at the same time I think it's in a very important time. I just read the Albert Camus book about create dangerously, and now is the time. These are times where writers especially are needed and necessary in this world, and it's a fascinating place to and space to be right
Yeah.
now as a writer.
Mhm.
So it's interesting. Can you write anywhere, or do you need a specific location when you write?
I truly can write anywhere. I actually, the one thing that I think is a preference of mine, I don't have to have it, but I really like to have it, is access to at least seeing like light and outdoor space. I love like living and working in Florida. I love like seeing the world is like very feral and alive and very vibrant. Things are always growing or scuttling or scurrying or just being movement,
Movement,
constant
yeah.
movement, and it's very beautiful to me, and I think that's enriching, and so I love to, like, have light and to look. But, I wrote my whole first novel, like, basically on, like, little 10-minute breaks in, like, the library basement where I was working where there were no
Okay.
windows, so I know I can do it anywhere. I also grew up, like, in a family too where we did not have any money, and I shared a bedroom with my sister, and we had one bathroom, and there was no place to be alone ever, and so I had to like learn very quickly because I was like the only reader really. And so even these like like hiding and reading the books I wanted to read, and then like reading these other books because people didn't value the fact that I wanted to like sit and read, so people would be talking or very loud or like asking me questions, and I had to like very much learn to like tune out
Hmm.
anything that wasn't there. So now I kind of work very well in spaces that I think are loud or maybe other people would consider to be abrasive. I can sit down in a bar and really pound something out. Like I can sit down in a crowded bar where people are yelling and spilling drinks and breaking glasses, and I can get a whole chapter done of a book, I think.
Yeah.
But I think I can work pretty much anywhere.
So music doesn't have any kind of negative effect on how you write or what you write, for
No,
example.
I think so much of that is learning to like, so like if I'm really in the zone, I
Nothing
won't hear a
matters.
single thing going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I every morning I get up and I go to this coffee shop a block away and I sit there and I work and I'll write and I'll put in my noise cancellation AirPods, and then they'll run out of juice and I'll take them out. And I'm like, oh, it's so loud in here, you know. I'm usually okay. They're playing music. I'm usually all right with it. There are certain noises like kids screaming where I'm just like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
I
Mhm.
can't get past that. But when you're looking at my whole apartment, and I've it's 500 square feet, and I've got a girlfriend, and when she's here, she likes to talk out loud to herself sometimes, and I want to
Mhm.
hear what she has to say, but I've got work to do,
Yeah.
so I'm working on trying to get to that point where I can write anywhere, but I still find myself needing like a bubble around me.
Yeah. I totally get that though. I know so much of like the reason that I can do it was because it was like forged under dire
It had
circumstances where
to,
it was the
yeah.
alternative was just don't do it at all. So I think that like a huge part of it is that. Like I really truly do.
That's got to also help with other aspects of life, yeah. Like you probably can stay focused without a lot of distraction.
I can shut it down and get it done, I think. But it is like I would also be lying if I said I'm just like also I will like procrastinate like crazy
Right,
on things.
right, right.
So let's be completely honest here.
We are creative people. We know how to procrastinate very well. I think
Yeah.
I think that, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the New York Times bestseller stuff.
Yeah.
You are that you and even hitting that mark is still. Even though hitting that mark is still sort of leveling up in your career, it seems that's really no guarantee of equal future success. Would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
I do. I mean, I also think too, there's no having any kind of understanding about what's going to make that occur. I think that people want to think there's some kind of formula for like making that happen. I can tell you with assurance that first novel of mine and the way that it did was so surprising to me.
Yeah,
No one was more shocked than I was
yeah.
that that novel did as well as it did. And I think it's like one of those things where the only thing you can do is kind of make art for yourself. And that's all I'm continuing to do. I also think too, we're moving through an age where it's like there's less and less like critical reviews of books. There's less like media outlets that are doing reviews or lists. There's like less spaces for that, and there's more books coming out now than ever. So there's so many books coming out all the time with like less like review space and like promotion space for those books. And that's really tough. And so then it means that like less and less books make those kinds of lists. But also now there's these kind of gargantuan books that's like months complimentary. These books have done very well, but like books that sit on the list for like months, you know? So they're taking up kind of space of like in this way where it's like to make it on the list at this point, there's no guarantee, even if you're in a, like if you get picked for a book club, you'll make the list. Like there's people who've gotten picked as like a Read with Jenna or like, a Good Morning America pick. And those books haven't made the New York Times list. And
Yeah.
so I think, and we all know like making that list isn't an indicator. It's not necessarily an indicator of like quality of prose or emotional engagement with the reader. Like I have found, especially with this last book that came out, which I mean, it did very well. It's especially for a book about a lesbian birthday party clown. I didn't think it was going to be like like an Oprah pick.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
it opens with like a sex scene with a clown, which I love.
That's so great.
But
I now
it's
okay. I'm going to buy this book today. I got to get it. So
it is like a thing where for me, it got incredibly nuanced critical response. People engaged with it. It got a very lovely New York Times review. It got a really wonderful Washington Post review. It got an incredible, gorgeous write up in Vulture in this way that I not only was it saying like, yes, this book is good, which of course you want, but I was like, I feel like these readers are reading my work in a way where they see what I'm trying to do. And that to me, I was like, this is invaluable to me as a creator because I'm trying to like make something so specific and so pointed in this kind of way. And I'm like, you wonder because you create it yourself and you're like, you're alone and you're like, I'm trying to do this. And will people see what I'm trying to do? And so to me, I'm like, that is like where I felt such value in like seeing like the book seen in these kinds of ways where it's like, I see what you're doing and I see you're trying to be funny, but I also see these underpinnings and like all that embroidery work underneath that you worked so hard on. And that to me is like incredibly valuable. It's not, I know it's not being like on the New York Times bestseller list, but it's a valuable thing that I think is like makes it to me being like, oh, I'm making art and people are reading it in a way where they feel like it's art.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a way. There's a. And I've said this before, but it almost seems like these days it's screaming in a loud arena. Like you're
Yeah.
just trying to get somebody to pay attention. And that can be real difficult when everybody these days seems to be a writer.
Yes. And it's like it's a difficult thing. I also think too, it's so important for me specifically to be like the writing of a book and the crafting of a project is a completely different thing than the publication and promotion of that same thing. And I have to remember that the reason that I do this thing is not the other side of that. It is sitting alone with the excitement of the research and it's sitting with this Word document and like pulling those little threads together. And that's the part that's like why I do that thing. If I don't want to be doing that thing, and if that's not the thing I'm spending the most time thinking about, then I'm thinking about it incorrectly
Incorrectly,
for
yeah.
myself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you think it's important when you mentioned how there's a very specific idea under that story, and recently I read this collection of Vonnegut stories that were unpublished, and it was there was a foreword that was written by Dave Eggers, and he talked about how fiction when he was writing is completely different from what people are putting out now,
Yeah.
just in content. Um, and it made me realize that maybe my stories are too broad of an idea, because you mentioned having a very specific, I mean, having sex with a clown, as the opening scene. Like, does a story need to have that sort of short runway, I guess?
No, I don't think so. I think it's like some of it is like a level of confidence for that specific project.
Yeah,
Because I also am like, this is like, right, like what that book is like my third novel, but how many projects have I written that have no one's ever seen those things?
true. Yeah.
That's a lot of things. I have 4 or 5 semi-completed or completed drafts of things that no one will literally no one will ever see. And I don't feel like those were like a waste of time, or I don't feel like stressed that they didn't become something. To me, those are like how I cut my teeth and learned to write the book that ended up getting published.
Mm,
Like these are all like we're writing constantly as practice and building a muscle. So each project kind of tells you what that thing is. Like this particular clown book opens with that scene, but it's also like that for that, it was just right for that particular project. I don't think anything needs to have like, and people can tell when you're trying to write like a little gotcha in
trying
there,
too
like
hard. Yeah.
something for like to be like really, scintillating, or like I just want to feel like, because you can feel when you're being like sold that in a kind of way in any kind of art, right? That's in TV and movies and like comedy specials and music. We can feel when those things are being put in there in a non-organic way because they are like, oh, I just want to like grab attention in a kind of way. There's plenty of things where I feel like the project tells you when there's like a thing that sits right in there, but some of it is like a lot of trial and error. And for me, everybody finds a different practice to do. And so for myself, each book creates its own set of rules and practices and procedures. The one I'm working on right now is completely different. It's definitely not opening that same kind of way.
Yeah.
But it's also broader and needs more from me, and I'm having to think about it in different ways that I haven't had to think about the other three books that way. And I think if you're coming into a project thinking about that imagined reader, or like, are they bored or something, then you're not really being gracious to you and you're the reader. You need to like be writing to you. And if you're writing to you, you're going to write something that's enjoyable and interesting because it's specifically curated to your gaze.
Right.
Right? And it's going to be something that you'll be like, this is interesting because it's something you want to read. And if it's not something you want to read, then like, why are you even working on anything?
So I'll ask this then, because I've talked to, a bunch of authors who say they know when something is done when they're just like, look, I can keep editing this or not. So like, how do you know then when you are done with that thing? Because for me, it's like, okay, I'm actually kind of tired of reading this story right now. I've read
Yeah.
it so many times. I've gone over it enough times. It needs to just go out into the world. So how do you know?
Yes.
Is that a good indicator for you?
I think it can be for sure. I mean, because I think all these writers are right, right? Like you can sit and like fiddle around with something until like the end of eternity,
Mm-hmm.
Like you can switch out word choice, you can like change like POV, you can do all these different things you know, into the eternity. But I think some of the time for me, it's kind of what the thing is. If it's an essay, I feel like the essay has reached a point of completion for myself when I feel like I have posed the questions inside of it in a way that I'm like, this is opening it up to a greater scope of inquiry, right?
Mm,
Where it's like, I'm not going in answering the static question I started with. I've discovered some other things and now I can put it out and hopefully people are in conversation with it. And that's a broader response. For a short story, that's always like a different process for me too, because I write those in such a different way than I write like a novel. I do like what Kelly Link calls like typewriter process of writing, which is like you start up and then you go down a little bit and come back up and edit and then go back down a little bit and come up and do that.
yeah,
I
yeah.
usually spend about, I want to say like, I'll be like if I'm in a short story, I'm in that draft and I'm not thinking about anything else for like, it takes me to get that draft done. So probably about like 4 or 5 days to get like a draft of about like 5,000 words of a story.
Okay.
And then just fooling around on the line level, but that thing is contained. It's like what I call like the snow globe of the story. It's like sitting in there. And so that usually the editing process on that, like the story's there. Like if I finish out and round out that short story, it's like sitting there. It needs like, I'm like, if I'm fiddling around with it longer than to clean up, I'm like, I know I'm just like playing around and I'm not being serious. Um, but for a novel, I think I know when I'm done with that novel because I'm like, I have told the story here and it's doing the things I want to do. And if there's anything that's like not there, it means like another fresh set of eyes need to look at it. I'm not a person who has a lot of readers. I only usually ever have like one person take a look. Like this last book I did, Jamie Attenberg took a look at this like first draft and I asked very specific questions. I'm like,
Okay.
can you tell me about X, Y, and Z? And she did that for me. But mostly it's like I'm sending it to my agent and I'll ask her to like I won't even ask her. I'm like just look at this and tell me. Um, but I think it's more of like for those, I'm like, I know the story I'm trying to do. And if I went in and did like a story, and it can even be like a surprising ending, I don't need to know what's going to happen. But did it like go somewhere and do a thing? Did a thing happen? Did something happen? Even if that something is like they could have made a choice and they didn't.
Yeah.
Like, did something happen? And if that, yes, something happened, then that is like, okay, it is like a created thing. And regardless of like how much I tweak on the sentence level, the story is there and complete and that draft is done. Yeah.
So it almost sounds like you've answered your own questions when that's how you know it's done. Like I know Stephen King wrote on writing, and in there he said he talked about the what if question. The
Hmm.
idea behind a story is that what if this happened? And if you can
Yeah.
answer that question, would you say that that story is done, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that, and I also think that it could like open up to something broader for
Yeah.
speculation. I don't want it to feel, if it feels flat to me when I'm done, that it's only like looked at that one kind of question I entered with, then I don't feel that draft is correct. It needs to be like starting point, and then many other questions open up. And
Okay.
if that happens, then usually it resolves itself to editing and like ending in a draft on its own correct timeline. If it never opens up past that initial question that I posed upon entering, then that draft is like usually not usable for me
Not
because it's
usable.
not
Okay.
going broader than my original thing.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So the moment you finish then the final draft of a novel or a short story, and even before you send it off to maybe an agent or a publisher, what's your biggest hope for it?
Oh. Usually for each project, I'm hoping something different. So for this last book, my hope was that I wanted somebody who like really disliked clowns to open that book and laugh at least one time.
Okay.
I was like, that's my like situation where I'm like, if somebody who really is like, I really, really don't like clowns, opened up and read that book. And I think for myself, I had that reaction from people, which was so pleasing to me, which is I had people be either they were very afraid of clowns, but they're like longtime readers of mine, and so they were willing to give me a shot, or people who read it and they were like, oh, I saw this as a person afterwards, not as a
Oh,
fear that
right,
I have.
right, right,
And I was like, that's wonderful. Like, I was like, if the idea, if I can get you to read this book and think of this as a person, isn't that all we're trying to do? We're just like trying to write people. So
right.
if we could
Yeah.
be like, you read this and you saw a person, then I think I've done my job.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It's always an interesting thing when I hear people talk about their hopes for what they write.
Yeah.
Because for some people it's just making a connection. And it's
Hmm.
just like I was just at Comic-Con recently, with my
Hmm.
publisher, and this guy came around. He's like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "We're the only people to sell poetry at Comic-Con." And he was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And he picked up my book and he's flipping through it and he's nodding, and he's like, "Thank you, I really appreciate that." And he put it down and walked away. And I thought, would have been nice for him to buy it, but that connection,
Yeah.
was kind of nice. Like it
Yeah.
felt like I made a little link with another person that I had never met before through a book,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I can appreciate all the different answers that are out there for that one. All right, let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and wrap up. I've had a lot of fun, and I have 4 million questions, but we'll kind of wrap it up with this one. And I've asked this of everyone, so I'm kind of curious what your answer would be. If there's one book or song or story or really anything creative you wish you wrote, what would it be?
Oh, I mean, that's a really easy one for me. I mentioned it earlier on, but actually, I'm gonna have two answers to this.
Okay.
Hopefully, that's okay. One is Bastard out of Carolina, because that to me is like by Dorothy Allison is the premier like book that made me want to become a writer, or
Mm.
not even become a writer, but like it felt like it gave me permission.
Justified things for a bit.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because it was the first time I'd seen somebody write about queerness in a way, because it's not necessarily written on the page, but it's in there, it's embedded in a kind of way where it's like if you know, like you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing it for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And the other was like writing about place like that. And I think that book is like to me a perfect book. I love that book so much. It was so tender to me. The other is maybe Alex Cheese, Edinburgh. That book made me weep on a plane.
Wow. Yeah.
And I would cry. So I'm always like telling Alex, I'm like, it's incredibly rude of you to have written a book like so gorgeous. I think that they're like two pieces of art that I probably have talked about more than any other like piece of art in my life is those two books because I was like they had such a profound impact on my emotional landscape. Like the first is like so much about like queerness and like space and place. And the second, like Alex's book, if you haven't read Edinburgh, it's like about queerness and like coming of age, but also so much about like the voice and music, right? Like the idea that a song sitting inside of a person, and like it's a very lyric, gorgeous book. I mean, Alex is a gorgeous writer, but it is like a thing where I'm like, oh, like when you feel like a song is like there and like this like kind of like space where it's like maybe about to emerge, and what does it mean if that's stifled down or taken or something like a vocal cord cut, like
Mm,
metaphorically speaking. And it's like those are two things where I'm like, if I'm thinking about them that much, they've obviously
had an
they've like
impact.
the geography of my writer's life is like very impacted by the two of them. So I
Yeah.
think about them constantly.
Do you do any other kind of art? Do you paint? Do you play music? Do you do any of that?
I mean, I grew up doing like a lot of music. I grew up in choirs. Now I just do karaoke.
Okay,
But
that's
I grew up in like a family. Like my family ran like the church band, so it's like my brother played guitar and my sister and I sang, and we did like a lot. I was like a so I grew up doing like a lot of things with music. I love to do embroidery. I grew up with like I know how to sew because I had to like take sewing classes as a child. They were mandatory.
mm,
So I know how to do a lot of like domestic arts and crafts stuff because it's like was required of like my very conservative Southern Baptist upbringing. But I've really enjoyed like repurposing those kinds of things for like my own like enjoyment. So now I do a lot of like freehand embroideries. And what I do is I never keep any of them. I'll make them like secretly for a friend or for somebody, and I'll like get their address and just mail them this embroidery,
right,
which
right.
to me is very fun in this kind of like freehand kind of way because now only do embroidery like without
No
like a
pattern.
plot or plan. I only freehand them, and they're very fun that way.
Yeah.
But I like doing arts and crafts. I think that's a really fun way to like look like to have the brain do something different while you're trying to like piece out or tease out a story.
I think that those creative side endeavors are really useful for your main creative endeavor. I used to whittle, just a
Oh, I
knife and a
love
block of
that. That's
wood
so
and just
fun.
like carve out some things. And I'm like, oh, I feel like I got a little like the juices were flowing all of a sudden. I was like,
Yeah.
I kind of want to write now, So
Yeah.
I really like, and as you can see, I've got guitars hanging. I sing and been playing music since I was a kid. So I think, I ask a lot of authors if they also do other things, and it just seems like everybody's got other creative hobbies. Nobody says, "Oh, I like accounting on the side." No one says the most boring things possible, but still, it's always interesting to find out what people are using as a creative um, unblocker. I guess is a good way
Yeah.
to say it. But embroidery, that's a good one. That's a good one.
It's fun. I think like because like so much of that like was attached to my like very strict upbringing because it was
Yeah.
like you had to use a pattern or you had to do some kind of thing. And so now when I do those things, it's very like whimsical and very freehand. Sometimes I'll do it off of an idea or I'll do it off of something somebody else likes or a photo or something. I did my buddy Willie, who's also one of my readers, I met him at Tin House Writers Workshop. He loves Cheez Its.
Oh,
And so I did him like a very beautiful embroidery of the Cheez Its logo with like little Cheez Its all over the place. And
that's
I'm like,
fun.
that's like fun. And he'll like enjoy that. But of course, it's like not something I'm using a pattern for. But yeah, you would like just sit and do those things. I think you're totally right. Doing that thing like frees up like another portion of your brain to be doing some kind of other creative thinking.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Well, Kristen, thank you again. I really enjoyed this, and I feel like we could probably keep going. But I thank you for making the time to talk today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.